an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the lives of Christopher Chant, chapters 20 and 21. In these chapters, Christopher travels to Series 11 in order to try and get back the scraps of Gabriel that have been floating around. And it is a much different ending than I remembered, or not that I remembered, than I expected. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Patricia for commissioning this entire book, and Patricia is here in the chat. Hello, Patricia. I am sad to say goodbye to this book because I've been enjoying this one a whole lot, but this ending, though, was so weird. So, one of the criticisms that I have had for Diana Wynne Jones books that I've covered so far has been that the endings feel weirdly rushed a lot of the time. And there's a little of that here, but because the ending is so filled with surprises, I kind of don't mind as much. Like, we get put into a completely separate sort of situation than what I was expecting. What I thought was going to happen was that, and this didn't really have anything to do with Series 11, so I knew it was likely not true. But I also didn't really understand what Series 11 could even be. So what I kind of thought was going to happen was what winds up happening at the very, very end and is resolved a lot more easily, which is that a chef was going to have taken Gabriel's lives. Something like that. And I thought maybe Series 11 would be reserved for gods or something like that. So when it winds up that Asheth is actually a very small, she still needs to be dealt with. Well, it's not Asheth, it's really Mother Proudfoot, but it's Asheth in like a indirect way. When it turns out that that's something that is actually handled fairly simply, and made all the simpler simply because Proudfoot likes the goddess Millie. I was really surprised because it seemed so simple. But yeah, I kind of expected Asheth to have maybe been like hoarding Gabriel's lives in exchange for getting Millie back, because I kind of thought, it turns out that what the people in Millie's series do is they just kill the, what do they call her? The living Asheth? But Proudfoot tries as much as she can to sort of smuggle them away and make sure that they're okay, and tells everybody that they've been killed. And what I sort of wondered was whether or not she gets eaten by Asheth. And Asheth is like, I need somebody's lives, so I'm going to take these. And yeah, she can stay here, but you have to like give me your Chrestomanci in exchange for my living Asheth, because you only can get I will only be able to consume a life that's as powerful as the living Asheth's life. It turns out to be obviously completely unrelated, but there is something about the symmetry of that I rather like. And I'm a little disappointed that we never actually get to meet the god Asheth, because I was expecting to, if not meet somebody who had met, Patricia says, I guess I read this as a kid and always thought of Millie as a side character and not really tied to the main storyline. And I think that's what you are supposed to think, but I was hoping that it would be a little bit more. I thought this was a side storyline, and it turns out to be more important than I expected. And it would still honestly be kind of a side storyline because Gabriel only like floats away and vanishes because of Ralph. He's not like, this wouldn't really make it the main story. Christopher still would be. But it would just sort of make everything a little bit more tidy and contained. And so in that respect, I like that, but I do, yeah, exactly, because Patricia's saying what I was thinking. I also want to know more about Tacroy / Mordecai. So yeah, that's definitely a part of it as well, is that I enjoyed seeing this other new universe, because as much as we have traveled with Christopher when he's done these errands and things and, you know, gone off in support of his horrible Uncle Ralph's business, there has been very little about the worlds that he's gone to. We've gotten some details about what a few of the people particularly look like. We got to, see some of where Millie comes from, and there's been a bit, but it hasn't been too focused on that. So what I liked about this was getting a really good look at 11. And it's not even called Series 11 because it's just the one world. Because the Drite, which is what their ruler is called, makes sure that there aren't multiples on purpose. This is all so weird. So, all right, let's back up and get started here. We start in chapter 20, having just realized that all of the lives have been sort of collected together and are floating towards 11. And Christopher realizes, on the one hand, that as much as this is bad news, if he is going to be really serious with himself and honest about how much he doesn't want Gabriel to come back because he's having such a good time, that maybe actually this is exactly what he would want to have happen. Like, honestly, this is kind of perfect. And he could just give up on looking for Gabriel and tell everybody, well, there's nothing to be done. Series 11, we all know that's no good. But what he decides to do is the right thing. And he seems as surprised by that as anybody. So the reason that Tacroy looked so ill becomes really clear, because I didn't understand the significance of Tacroy looking the way that he did at the end of the last chapter. I thought that he was just realizing he was going to have to go on a fool's errand or a suicide mission. But it turns out that he's having a particular reaction because he knows what 11 is and he knows how dangerous it's going to be. And he hasn't told anybody the truth about himself. And he doesn't know that he can, like, actually physically can do so. We find out later how they manage it, but it seems like he's right in that there's no way to keep them from finding out. So Tacroy and Christopher go off to talk together, and Tacroy asks him to put up the strongest spells for privacy that he can to keep them from being overheard. And even after Christopher does this, it's like, he says their magic is so different from ours that honestly doing this is probably not even going to accomplish it, because they have my actual soul and they can tell what I'm doing from that. So probably they'll realize what I'm telling you immediately and it's not even going to matter. But anyway, and then he says, they know most of what I do, and what they don't know, I have to go and report to them in spirit. You saw me going there once. They summoned me to a place near Covent Garden. So that explains that, how Christopher, saw him, but Tacroy didn't respond when he tried to call to him, because he was being specifically summoned. And he says, this is so weird. With you, your soul's the part that carries on from life to life. Mine was detached from me when I was born, as it is with all 11 people. They kept it there when they sent me here to 12 as a baby. Why did they send you? To be their guinea pig, said Tacroy. The Drite puts someone in another world from time to time when he wants to study it. This time he decided he wanted to study good and evil, so he ordered me to work for Gabriel first, and then for the worst villain he could find, who happened to be your uncle. They don't go by right and wrong in 11. They don't consider themselves human. Or, no, I suppose they think they're the only real people, and then they study the rest of you like something in a zoo, when the Drite happens to feel interested. Who's the Drite? King, priest, chief magician. He's not quite any of those. He's called the High Father of the Sept, and he's thousands of years old. He's lived that long because he eats someone's soul whenever his power fails, but he's quite within his rights doing that. All the 11 people and their souls belong to him by 11 law. I belong to him. So Christopher realizes, oh, okay, so he reached out and took Gabriel's lives. He could tell they were out there floating around, and he's snatching them, right? And Tacroy is like, yep, I kind of figured once they said where they were going that that's what was happening. He says, I know he's always wanted to study someone with 9 lives. They can't get them in 11 because there's only one world there, not a series. The Drite keeps it down to one world so he won't have any rivals. And you know how your 9 lives came about, right? Because all the doubles you might have had in other worlds never got born for some reason. And Christopher kind of gets into like, well, what's the law surrounding that? And Tacroy essentially is like, the law is you do what you want unless somebody can challenge you, pretty much. Like, the laws are whoever's the strongest makes the rules. And nobody's really going to try and fight this guy. Like, there's really not a lot of enforcement to be done on the Drite. And he finally is like, all right, I need you to tell me everything about 11 that you can think of so that I know what I'm getting into, because we are definitely going there. And he tells, really, I find some intimidating information, which is they have the weather controlled so they can live out in the open forest and control what trees grow and where. Food comes when they call, and they don't use fire to cook it. They don't use fire at all. They think you're all savages for using it, and they're just as scornful about the kind of magic all the other worlds use. The only time they think any of you are any good is when one of you was absolutely loyal to a king or a chief or someone. They admire people like that, particularly if they cheat and lie out of loyalty. So this winds up being extremely important later. So they have to, go on this journey, and he gets like very detailed about what it is that Christopher should wear in order to be taken seriously. He's like, he says, first of all, the closest thing I can like describe them as is probably elves. And not like, they're not like Keebler elves. We're talking about like high elves that are sort of haughty and distant and like more than human, but lacking in humanity. There's just something really unearthly and alien about them. And they're very, very scornful. Like, that's a key thing, is essentially acting like you're better than other people is a given right out of the gate. And the more convincing you are that you deserve to act that way, the more they will respect you. They won't show it, but you will know that they do. And he says that fur is a real marker of status there. So they have to like make something to wear out of this like fur carpet that they get. This is so funny, you guys. I have to read you this description because it sounds absolutely banana pants, and I have to imagine that this is the root of why the Chrestomanci in Charmed Life dresses as fancy as he does, because Gabriel doesn't dress this way. And I can't help but think that this like weirdly rubbed off on Christopher, and he realized that he really liked fancy clothes. But yeah, on Tacroy's advice, he dressed for the journey. Christopher conjured the tiger skin rug from the middle saloon, and the goddess cut a hole in it for his head. Miss Rosalie found him a lordly belt with great brass studs in it to go around the middle, while the housekeeper produced a fox fur to wrap around his neck and a mink stole for the goddess. And it would help to have it hung all over with ornaments, said Tacroy. No silver ones, remember, Christopher called. He ended up with 3 gold necklaces and a rope of pearls. Yolanda's entire stock of earrings was pinned artfully here and there on the tiger skin, with Beryl's brooches in between. Around his head he had Miss Rosalie's gold evening belt with Erica's mother's mourning brooch pinned to the front of it over his forehead. Guys, what? Like, I am dying to know what this looks like. This sounds absolutely bonkers. He chinked in a stately way when he moved, rather like the goddess in the temple. The goddess herself merely had a cluster of ostrich feathers at the front of her head and somebody's gold bracelets around the bottom of her Norfolk breeches. They wanted to make it clear that Christopher was the most important one. Tacroy just stayed as he was. They know me, he said. I have no rank in the sept at all. I just can't, guys. He's got a belt around his head with like a brooch in the middle. What even? I'm just kind of picturing, you know, when Doug Funny from the Doug cartoon becomes Quail Man and his belt is tied around his head and is like sticking up in the middle. That's what I keep picturing here, is like the Quail Man headdress. So they get through and they think it's going to be this huge ordeal to break through the enchantments to get into 11. But it turns out to be super duper easy. And it really is revealed they know in 11 that these guys are coming. So they make it simple because evidently the whole thing is that the Drite wants to make a deal and is trying to sort of throw them off balance so that they will agree to whatever. We'll get there. Okay. So they come out in this gorgeous forest and there's no bushes. It's very grassy and there's just like trees that are dotted very evenly apart. All seem to be the same tree, all around the same like growth cycle. They're all about the same size. And there is a guy walking past who is looking at them with a little bit of startlement. But when Christopher calls out to him and he tries to be rude the way that he knows he has to get respect here, this dude just acts like he never heard them. And the goddess is like, well, didn't he hear? And Tacroy says, yeah, oh, almost definitely. But he wanted to make it clear that he was more important than you. And he says he was obviously low in the sept. Even the lowest ones like to think they're better than anyone else in the related worlds. Walk on and we'll see if anything comes of it. Which way? Asked Christopher. Any way, said Tacroy with a slight smile. They control distance and direction here. Which honestly, is that like the scariest thing you ever heard? There is something about that complete lack of control, even of what direction you're walking in, that is so fucking unsettling to me. I hate that idea, that whole concept. Like, it's one thing when we have it in the gardens at Chrestomanci Castle, and it's done so that you can like keep people from getting into a really powerful garden. So it always seems like that garden's on their left, because that is that particular location that you are affecting with directional spells. But this is either the people that you're affecting or the entire world. Either one is bad to me. And so they start walking, and there's like this sensation of almost not moving at all because all the trees are so similar. And Christopher has to look around at the doorway that they came through to even be able to tell if they're actually walking, because it's just so, it feels like he's on a treadmill a little bit, you know? And he's realizing, like, if the whole of 11 is covered with trees the way that this place is, that maybe they don't use fire because they know of the risk of doing that. I don't really think that's probably related. I could see why he thinks that, but I guess I'm definitely going to be somebody who assumes when I walk into a world that I'm seeing a tiny fraction of it, and I wouldn't expect an entire world to be covered with trees just because of where I arrived. So they finally come upon this fence. And it's lovely. It's very well made. It's all polished and varnished and whatnot. And it looks pretty low. It only comes up to their waists, and it seems like it's not really going to be much of an issue. But then when they try and squeeze through the stakes, they somehow seem to like move closer together, when they try and throw their stuff over the fence, it just like hits this barrier and bounces back. They keep on coming across sudden interference with them trying to do anything to get past this. And the goddess surmises that the dude whom they yelled at probably did this to the fence because he did hear them and he's trying to like kind of embarrass them, honestly. And Tacroy had said earlier that their magic is very, very different. So this like is the beginning of Christopher's attempts to sort of figure out exactly how their magic works and how to get around the limitations of his own thinking. It's that he isn't approaching things with the right, what do you call it? Mindset, perception, I don't know. Sorry, Patricia's commenting. I wonder who controls the distance and direction. Like if someone gets pissed off, they make you walk all day to get home. Oh man, that's fucked up. And send a rainstorm to you. Oh, man, that's brutal. Really? I thought it was the Drite who did the fence. Well, this is what, because they discovered the fence was now all around them. Behind them, there was no sign of the gate among the trees, nothing but a row of stakes blocking the way back. He did hear, said the goddess. I think they were expecting us, said Christopher. Okay, so yeah, the goddess thinks that it was the one guy, but Christopher says, no, I think it's bigger than that. So I think you're right, Patricia. And Tacroy sits down, but as Christopher begins to sit, he's like, no. If you're important, you stand. So you got to stand. And all of a sudden, they notice there's this little boy. And he is sitting with Tacroy. And he is inside the same fence. And he says that he's been here this whole time, but they just didn't see him for some reason. And it turns out that he is Gabriel DeWitt. And that somehow he was like put back together wrong so that he turned back into a little boy. All of his lives got put together wrong. And we find out later that the Drite purposely put him back together so as to make him more manageable. He chose the form of him as a little boy because he's easier to control this way. How many lives have you? He asked disbelievingly. That's odd. Usually I have 9, but I can only seem to find 7. Then we've got all of him, said the goddess. With complications, said Tacroy. Does the title Chrestomanci mean anything to you? Isn't he some boring old enchanter? Asked the boy. I think his real name's Benjamin Allworthy, isn't it? Gabriel had gone right back to being a boy. Benjamin Allworthy had been the last Chrestomanci but one. So yeah, this is kind of adorable. This little boy is like just having a good time, weirdly. He like, as much as he is just standing here, he's not being fed or anything. And that's all very unpleasant. But once they get into just fucking with the Drite with magic, he has a really good time. Patricia says, I thought it was just a dig at Christopher, but it might be both. I don't know what you're referencing. What was a dig at Christopher? I'm sorry, Patricia. I didn't see it in time. So let's see. Neither of us was born when he was that age. Making Gabriel a boy. I mean, that's what the Drite says, is that he made him into the shape that was the most manageable later on. It's in the dialogue. But I don't know if there's like layers to that or what. I didn't pick up on that, if there was. So all like more people begin to turn up, and we find out a lot later that these people are not actually here. Not all of them anyway. Some of them are. But there's a lot of people who sort of are projecting their likeness to make it seem like there's a crowd once the Drite gets there, and they aren't actually, they're still like off doing their chores and shit somewhere else. So 5 minutes pass, and Christopher's feet begin to react. It's like somebody's put a spell probably on them. And it says Christopher's feet felt wider and hotter and more overused every second. He began to hate 11. There seemed to be no birds here, no animals, no wind, just ranks of beautiful trees that all looked alike. The temperature never changed from just right, and the people were horrible. Yeah, I really... Can I tell you guys how much having painful feet bums me out? Like, everything else about the world can be perfectly right, but if my feet hurt, I am a miserable person to be around, and I am miserable in my own mind. Like, him having to stand there while his feet are being purposely made to hurt and feel like he's been standing longer than he has just feels really rude and mean to me, and I hate it so, so much. So then they finally, the guy they had seen initially comes back, and this is like, when it sounds, if it sounds like, as I'm recapping this, that kind of nothing's happening, that's kind of exactly correct, and that's the point, is that they are being kept waiting and toyed with for the fun of it. Just to show that nobody's really interested in meeting with you right away. You're not important enough to give that much attention to, except as like a curiosity. And it's really kind of the power move of like, I'm going to call a meeting and then act like I'm still on the phone with somebody else when you arrive and I can't quite meet you on time. Or I'm going to meet with you, but I'm not going to be the first to talk. You will. That kind of, like, you know, corporate TED Talk sort of advice. So they try to do something on this guy that they had seen at first that comes back around. And there's this lovely moment with the goddess being able to figure out the magic of this place, at least a little bit, before Christopher is. So I like this. He came and leaned on the fence and stared at them as if they were something in a zoo. In order to put his elbows on top of the sharp stakes, he had somehow made a wooden armrest appear. Christopher could not fathom the peculiar magic he used to do that, but the goddess always seemed a little quicker on the uptake than Christopher. She frowned at the armrest and seemed to get the hang of it. The block of wood hurtled away into the trees, sending the man's arms down onto the spikes quite hard. Gabriel laughed, an ordinary, unforbidden gurgle. The man sprang upright indignantly, went to rub his arm, and then remembered that he should not show pain before inferiors. He swung around and went marching away. Christopher was annoyed, both with the man and with the goddess for being so much quicker than he was. The two things together made him so angry that he raised his arms and tried to hurl the man upwards the way he had levitated all the things in Dr. Pawson's house. It was almost impossible to do. True, the man went up 6 feet or so, but he came down again gently and easily the next second, and looked jeeringly over his shoulder as he slipped earthwards. This seemed to make the goddess even angrier than Christopher. "I'll do it," she said. "Come on, Gabriel." So they all heaved together, and they can only get him about 3 feet in the air, but he tries to act like it's not happening, and keeps walking as if he's walking normally, and it looks ridiculous. So they don't quite succeed, but he does lose some dignity in the fact that he's trying so hard to keep his dignity. So finally, they let him down and yell, "Take us to the Drite again." And Christopher, when the guy leaves, asks Tacroy, "Did that even do anything?" And Tacroy says, "No way of knowing. They always like to keep you waiting until you're too tired and angry to think straight." And finally, just as Christopher is like, "Jesus Christ, this is like, should I just levitate myself so that I can stop standing on these painful feet of mine?" He sees that the trees are moving out of the way. And eventually, here comes the Drite. And Christopher uses his witch sight to kind of get the measure of everybody here. And he says he could see the Drite doing it now. In order to work magic in this world, you seemed to have to work in a way that was tipped sideways from the way you did it on any other world, with a bend and a ripple to the magic, as if you were watching yourself work in a wavy glass ball. Christopher was not sure he was going to be able to do it. And there's a moment where Gabriel's, like, child Gabriel is like, I can't get the hang of this. And Christopher's feeling very, very smug about the fact that he has figured it out sooner than Gabriel. But, like, you did just say you didn't know if you could do it, Christopher. So just be cool for a second and don't get too cocky, kid. And Gabriel blurts out that the Drite looks like a god that eats his own children. And I love that so much. Gabriel, you poor thing. Seeing you turn into a grim old man is a bummer. So it says the smooth brown features did not have any expression on them at all, but Christopher stared, trying to see the person behind the blankness. What feelings the Drite had were so different from his own and so lofty that for a moment he felt like an insect. Then he remembered that glacier, years ago in Series 7, which Tacroy had said reminded him of two people. Christopher knew that one of the people was the Drite. Like the glacier, the Drite was cold and high and too crusted with ancient knowledge for ordinary people to understand. On the other hand, the other person the glacier had reminded Tacroy of was Uncle Ralph. Christopher looked carefully for any signs that the Drite was like Uncle Ralph. There was not much of Uncle Ralph's shoddy look to the Drite's grand face, but his features did not seem sincere. Christopher could tell that the Drite would cheat and lie if it suited him, like Uncle Ralph, but he thought that the main way the two were alike was that they were both utterly selfish. Uncle Ralph used people. So did the Drite. So at this point, Christopher tells the Drite that he's basically the Drite for 12A. Like the Chrestomanci, but like it's basically the same thing. And it's sort of cheeky, he thinks, but it seems to work. I don't feel like it's that cheeky at all. I feel like that's pretty accurate in a lot of ways, except like, you know, less psychotic. But in general, it seems similar enough. To himself, Christopher felt he was all weak points, but it seemed to him that since the magic here was so peculiar, he had no idea what his own powers were, and that meant the Drite probably had no idea either, which is a really good point. And he asks, why are you here? And there is a moment right before he asks that, in which Christopher gets a really good look at these people that are staring at him. Every one of the people was staring at Christopher with contempt and dislike. Christopher put his face into the same expression and stared back, and he realized that his face was rather used to looking this way. He had worn this expression most of the time he had lived at the castle. It gave him an unpleasant shock to find that he had been quite as horrible as these elven people. Or 11 people. See that? See that? My little mistake. Elven. 11. Close enough. It's probably on purpose. I like it. Yo, guys, there is nothing quite like figuring out that you have been an asshole and really seeing it. Like seeing it. It is just jarring. I can't with that. Like, there are a lot of moments, especially as you get older, that you thought you were being perfectly fine. And with the, like, fullness of years, and by fullness, I mean like a decade, you will look back and be like, oh my God, I was the worst. I can't believe, and I really thought I was being cool, or I really thought I was being nice, and I was being fucking awful. But this isn't even him thinking that he had been being nice. This is just an attitude problem that he had. Yeah, I just really enjoy the fact that he's getting this little bit of like insight here. So Christopher says, I've come to fetch back something of my own, but first let me introduce you to my colleague, the living Asheth. And he can see that the Drite is actually a little bit impressed by her. And he says, you know my man Mordecai Roberts already. And he says, well, let's see, where is it? What thing of your own have you allowed to stray into my world? They were getting down to business at last, even though the droid was trying to pretend that Christopher had been careless. Christopher smiled and shook his head to show he thought that was a joke of the droid's. 2 things, he said. First, I have to thank you for retrieving the lives of Gabriel DeWitt for me. It has saved me a lot of trouble. But you seem to have put the lives together in the wrong way and made Gabriel into a boy. I put them into the form which is easiest to deal with, said the droid. Like everything he said, this was full of other meanings. Oh, okay, I see what you're talking about, Patricia. If you think boys are easy to deal with, Christopher said, I'm afraid that's not the case. Not boys from 12A. So yeah, I see what you're saying, that this was meant to be like, he's easy to deal with, and in a practical sense, that is probably why he chose this. But he's also saying this to Christopher to just be like, you ain't shit. I know you're a kid. So I get what you're saying with that. And there's basically a back and forth with him trying to say things and be truthful with his answers without actually showing his hand that he has less power, or that he is, generally the whole way this is set up, he says, you have a claim to DeWitt and he can be yours depending on what else you have to say. And Christopher goes on and says, the other thing I have to say is about this man of mine who is usually known as Mordecai Roberts. I believe he used to be yours, which means you still have his soul. Since he's my man now, perhaps you could let me have his soul. And Tacroy, who had not expected to be part of any of this bargain, is very uncomfortable and worried about suddenly being talked about in this manner. And Christopher ignores him because as soon as he decides he's coming to Series 11, he takes it for granted that they are going to try and get Tacroy's soul back. There's no way we're just going to leave it with these fucking people, which, you know what? Amen, sir. And the droid seems to know that he's going to ask this, and Christopher starts to realize that maybe he's got a whole plan laid out that Christopher doesn't know about. There was something the droid expected to get out of this, something he must want very much indeed, but what? So he asks Christopher, do you know his soul name? Mordecai's soul name. And when he says Tacroy, there are a lot of people who are very irritated with the fact that he got that right. And when the droid asks, what has he done to make himself yours? Christopher says, he lied for me. He lied for me for a whole day, Christopher said, and he was believed. The first real sound in this place swept through the seated people. It was a long, throaty murmur of awe, approval. Whatever it was, Christopher knew he had said the right thing. As Tacroy had told him, these people naturally lied for their droid, and to lie convincingly for a whole day showed the utmost loyalty. He could then be yours, the droid admitted, but on 2 conditions. The first is that you show you know which the Sepman soul is. So there's this whole test where they put out a bunch of these objects, which turn out to be souls, and they are all made of silver. And so in selecting one, Christopher has to give up his magic for a time because it's touching his skin and it's made of silver. And also, there are so many of them that it's, going to be a challenge not knowing what a soul should look like or who's, he's never done this before. He has no point of reference for any of this. So he goes out there, and I love this description. Some were almost black, some yellowish, others white or shiny. He was not sure if they were statuettes or blobs of stuff that had melted and hardened into peculiar shapes. A few of them looked vaguely human. Most were no shape that meant anything, but the stuff they were made of meant a great deal. And Christopher's starting to realize that he might be in over his head a little bit. And he thinks maybe he can use witch sight because he's not actually touching them. Even if they're made of silver, it still might work on them. But as he uses it, nothing changes. He can tell his witch sight's working, but it's not actually affecting what the souls look like at all. So then he comes across one that's the only nice looking object. It looked no more human than any of the others, but it looked nice, 50 times nicer than the rest. So he goes on and acts like he hasn't got it yet. And the Drite seems to be able to see in his face that he has figured it out and starts to try to cheat and makes the line of these objects suddenly, a mile long. And Tacroy's is all the way at the other end. And they're changing shape and they're melting into different forms. And then all of a sudden it goes back to how it was, and Christopher can sense that was the goddess interfering with the Drite's magic. She knew that he was in the middle of cheating and fucked it up so that it went back to how it had been. And I love her. She's staring at the Drite with her arms spread. My priestess has taught me that it was low to cheat. I'd have thought you were too proud to stoop to it. I named no rules, he said. So Christopher, for his part, has picked up the soul at this point, made of silver, and this has caused the magic to fall away from him. And when he looks at the Drite now, he looks different. It says the Drite looked smaller to him and not nearly so magnificent. There were clear signs of the shoddiness he had seen in Uncle Ralph. Christopher was still scared stiff, but he felt much better about things now he had seen that, which I really like. I mean, it's not like you can judge everything about how somebody looks, of course. But there is something about being able to see past the finery of a person. And no matter what we say, how someone's dressed changes how you see them. It's just fucking fact. And the only time that that's not true is when it's somebody that you literally live with because, you become so familiar. And even then, it still can. But yeah, I really like the fact, this is sort of an unmasking, and I wish that Tacroy could also see the Drite the way Christopher sees him here. I'm not sure if that's possible. I don't know how it goes with removing magic. It's obviously something that can be done, but Christopher's can be deactivated because of silver, and I'm not sure that's something that any other magicians seem to have, is that one particular substance that's their what do you call it, Achilles heel. So yeah, he selects the correct soul and he goes up and gives it to Tacroy, and Tacroy is just absolutely fucking flabbergasted. It sinks into his flesh and infuses him. Tacroy looked much as usual, except there was a glow about him which made him much more like the Tacroy Christopher knew from the place between. And Tacroy says something about how now you understand that this is why I couldn't ask Rosalie to marry me. He wasn't free to do that, even though obviously there was something between them. So that's absolutely heartbreaking, and I hate it, and I'm so glad that they're back able to be together now. So he yells at Christopher, watch the Drite, and when Christopher turns around, the goddess is on her knees, and the Drite has obviously forced her down that way and starts to try to force Christopher down as well. And all of a sudden it stops, and the Drite begins to name his second condition. I am moderate. You came here demanding 7 lives and a soul. I give you them. All I ask in exchange is 1 life. Gabriel laughed nervously. I have got a few to spare, he said, if it means getting out of here. This was what the Drite wanted, Christopher realized. He'd been aiming for the life of a 9-lifed enchanter freely handed over all along. If Christopher had not dared to ask for Tacroy's soul, he would have asked for a life for setting Gabriel free. For just a second, Christopher thought they might as well let him have one of Gabriel's lives. He had 7, after all, and another lying on the floor back in the castle. Then he saw it would be the most dangerous thing he could do. It would give the Drite a hold over Gabriel, the same hold that he had over Tacroy for as long as his other lives lasted. The Drite was aiming to control the Chrestomanci, just like Uncle Ralph was aiming to control Christopher. They did not dare give him one of Gabriel's lives. So Christopher decides that he will give one of his own lives up. And he says, if you take more than one, it would kill me and give my world the right to punish yours. Once you have that life in your hands, your conditions are fulfilled, and you must let all 4 of us go through the gate back to 12A. So the Drite agrees to this, and Christopher is able to pull one of the lives off. And he expects it to hurt quite a lot, but it doesn't at all. And there's just this like floppy, transparent shape in the Drite's hand. And Christopher conjures fire to that shape and kills that life and sets the Drite on fire as well. He knew it was the one thing that might cancel out all those thousands of years of experience. To his relief, the goddess had made exactly the same calculations. He had a glimpse of her with all 4 arms spread, conjuring fire down as he called it up. His 7th life leapt into flame all over at once. The Drite hung on to its shoulders as it blazed, grimly trying to quench it, but Christopher had been right. Fire magic was the Drite's weak point. His attempt to reverse the spell was slow and hesitating, but he kept trying and hung onto the life by its shoulders until he had to let go or lose both hands. By that time, the front of his lion skin was on fire, too. Christopher glimpsed him trying to beat it out and coughing in the smoke as he collapsed himself into a writhing heap on the turf. It was worse than being crisped by the dragon. He was in agony. He had not realized it would hurt at all, let alone this much. So at this point, Tacroy grabs him and throws him over his shoulder, and they fucking run back. And so, yeah, essentially what this is Christopher cheats because he knows that the other guy isn't above cheating. So he's like, yeah, you can have one of my lives. I'm going to immediately kill it. But once you have it in your hand, that's our deal is like done. And you never said that I couldn't immediately kill myself, essentially is what he's doing, commit suicide. I feel like there has to be some sort of like comeuppance for this, but I don't know how that works. So they get through the gate, immediately shut it, and Christopher is like in so much pain still. But Gabriel is in the middle of growing up very suddenly now that he is back in the proper series. And it describes like him like being young and wistful, then older and keener, and then middle-aged and bleached and somehow hopeless and desperate, as if everything he had hoped for was gone. The next instant this man had pulled himself together into a brisk, silvery gentleman, and then the same gentleman older and grimmer. Christopher stared, awed and rather touched. He realized that Gabriel had hated being the Chrestomanci, and they were seeing the stages by which he had come to terms with it. I'm glad I'm going to find it easier than that, Christopher thought, as Gabriel finally became the grim old man that Christopher knew. At which point Gabriel tottered to Tacroy's trance couch and folded down onto it. So yeah, I love that because Christopher had really expected to struggle with being Chrestomanci, and now that's reversed, and he's realizing that it sounds like a super fun time and he's going to really enjoy it. And the guy that he had thought sort of reveled in his power and being able to like control everything, it turns out did not want this job, did not enjoy this job. I'm assuming that the middle-aged, like bleached out look is the one where he had just become like a Chrestomanci, and that was where everything that he cared about had been taken and was gone. I figure that's probably what that is. And I just, that sucks. So Gabriel says thank you to Christopher and says like, and Tacroy also probably has even more to thank you for. And Christopher's like, dude, can we not send him to prison, please? I would really appreciate it if we don't do that. And Gabriel promises to do what he can. And then Gabriel says that fearsome Drite has much to answer for, though I may be right in supposing that Mordecai went on working with you for your equally fearsome uncle, because he knew that any other spirit traveler your uncle chose would have turned you into a hardened criminal before long. Would you agree? Well, said Christopher, trying to be honest, I think some of it was because we were both so keen on cricket, which I just think is the most precious I love that he keeps on bringing that up. And Gabriel then starts talking to Millie and is kind of like, girl, what are you doing? Like, you used the goddess as your second life to get out of your world and come to this one? And the goddess looked down from his eyes and nodded, and it didn't even occur to me that she was lying. We find out later that she's lying. But at this point, I thought she was just ashamed of herself. And he says, my dear girl, what a very foolish thing you have done. You're clearly a powerful enchantress in your own right. You had no need to use a Sheth. You've simply given her a hold over you. The arm of a Sheth is going to haunt you for the rest of your life. And the goddess thinks that the magic she has comes from a Sheth. And he's like, no. A Sheth certainly has powers, but she doesn't share them. Like the ones you've got. That's your shit. And the goddess is absolutely flabbergasted. And I love this turn of events. The fact that she thought this was all from the goddess, and it's totally not. And they get interrupted by the lobster pot coming down. This is the best in the world ever, and I want every single villain from here until the end of time to face their end at the paws of an angry cat, because it's the best. Uncle Ralph is in there. He's got this fucking like suit of armor. He's got a mace, and he's trying to fucking fight off this cat, and the cat is just absolutely losing its goddamn mind. And Uncle Ralph could be seen tramping slowly around and around inside the cage, smashing cat saucers under his metal feet and taking violent swings at Throgmorten. Throgmorten could move faster than Uncle Ralph or his mace, and he could climb the walls of the lobster pot. But he could not get at Ralph through his armor. All he could do was make shrill metal scratches on it. So Gabriel is watching this and is fucking delighted. It is the first time that he has seen Gabriel smile this way since he's been here. It's the same smile that he had as a little boy. And Gabriel's like, so what do you think we give the cat like 1 minute's worth of time? And Christopher nods, and Gabriel causes Uncle Ralph's armor to vanish. Throgmorten instantly became a 7-legged, 3-headed, razor-clawed, flying, spitting fury. He was up and down and all over Uncle Ralph several times in the first second. So much blood got shed that Christopher was quite sorry for Uncle Ralph after 15 such seconds. After 30 seconds, he was quite glad when Throgmorten vanished with a snarl and a jerk. Throgmorten reappeared, kicking and struggling over the goddess's arm. No, Throgmorten, she said. I told you before you're not to go for people's eyes. That's not nice. Nice or not, Gabriel said regretfully, I was enjoying it. And he's winding something that nobody can see in a skein over one hand, and we find out that it's Uncle Ralph's magic. He took his magic away so the guy won't be able to defend himself. And then comes this whole thing where Throgmorten immediately, as they try to lift the cage off, is trying to get back underneath to get at Ralph again. And they wind up just sort of having to like shuffle and shove the cage sideways because Throgmorten is just looking for any opening that he can to get in there, which is fucking hysterical to me. I love it so much. Let's see. As soon as the cage was off the pinnacle, a silver pillar rose out of the blood-spattered floor. The pillar looked human, but it was impossibly tall for a human, a good foot taller than Gabriel. Up and up it rose, a woman robed in silver, wearing a silver mask and carrying a silver sphere. So the goddess recognizes, at first she thinks it's a Sheth, and then we find out shortly that it is Mother Proudfoot. And she says, I've been trying to get through this pentacle ever since I traced you, child. I wish you would talk to me before you bolted like that. You surely knew I would have stretched the rules for you if I could. You seem respectable enough. And she sees DeWitt, and like when she first comes in, she's like, I thought this place would be more respectable because it's absolute anarchy in here right now. But she sees DeWitt. He assures you that they're usually more respectable. And she says, that's what I thought. And then asks, would you be able to take charge of this Asheth daughter for me? And Gabriel's like, what what do you mean? And she's like, well, basically adopt her. Make sure that you are giving her an education. And she admits, this one was my favorite, a chef. I usually try to spare their lives anyway when they get too old, but most of them are such stupid little lumps that I don't bother to do much more. But as soon as I knew this one was different, I started saving from the temple funds. I think I have enough to pay her way. And she opens this chest, and it's full of this, like, weird quartz pieces. And it becomes clear that these are uncut diamonds. And she's like, do you think this is going to be enough? And Gabriel's like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, he doesn't say that, but you can tell that he's just like, yeah, I think that should do it. And she sort of like snaps at him when he's like very sure that should be plenty. She's like, I mean a good school, just so we're clear. I don't want you fucking skimping, which I love the fact that she's like so worried about it. And the goddess runs up to Gabriel and hugs him because she's so delighted that he is agreeing to do this. And then hugs Proudfoot and gets a little misty-eyed. Mother Proudfoot does. But then she says, Asheth truly does require a life, one for each living Asheth. Everyone in all the Anywheres seem to want him to give them lives. Now he would be down to the one in the castle safe. Gabriel drew himself up, looking his most forbidding. Asheth isn't very discriminating, Mother Proudfoot said before he could speak. I usually strip a life off one of the temple cats. She pointed with her silver spear to where Throgmorten was stalking around the lobster pot, making noises like a kettle boiling. That old ginger's still got 3 lives or so left. I'll take one of his. And Throgmorten finally realizes what's happening and is like, fuck this, and books it upstairs. And Gabriel is like, you know what? Actually... And he takes one of his lives and hands it over. Picked his limp, transparent likeness out from among the library chairs. So weird. Courteously, he draped it over the end of Mother Proudfoot's spear. I love it so much. This is such a weird, So, she steps off the chest of diamonds and disappears. And the goddess is super, super duper excited, and then realizes that maybe she doesn't deserve this because she's been lying. And she tells him, I think I'd better stay in the castle because of all the trouble I caused Christopher. He's lonely, I would be a fool not to have realized that. And he's starting to say there's no reason you should not go to school. And she says, I have to own up like they do in the books. I don't deserve to go to school. I didn't use a Sheth as my second life in order to come here. I used one of Christopher's. I didn't dare use a Sheth in case she stopped me. So I took one of Christopher's lives when he was stuck in the wall and used that instead. Where is it? Christopher asked, very much astonished. Still in the wall, the goddess sobbed. I pushed it right in so that no one would find it, but I felt bad ever since. I've tried to help and atone for it, but I haven't done much, and I think I ought to be punished. And Gabriel's like, don't fucking worry about it. We'll send Tacroy. He'll go get it. And he's like, and I can't not send you to school. I got given all of these diamonds. I'm not going to swindle her and not send you to school. Regard that as your punishment. You may come and live in the castle with the rest of the young enchanters during the holidays. Halls, she corrected Gabriel. The books always call them the halls, which I love that she's so obsessed. Like, it's like she is me when I was like 10. If somebody suddenly told me I was going to be living in the same universe where the Narnia books took place and I got to like go to one of their private schools, like, I would absolutely be all wrapped up in the things that I had read about. I would be obsessed. Darling Christopher, why did you not... Oh, that's right. There's a letter that arrives. This is the only thing that really feels weirdly rushed. Darling Christopher, why did you not tell me that your dear papa was settled here in Japan? It's such an elegant country. Once one is used to the customs, and your papa and I are both very happy here. Your papa's horoscopes have had the honor to interest some people who have the ear of the emperor. We're already moving in the highest circles and hope to move higher still before long. Your dear papa sends love and best wishes for your future as the next Chrestomanci. My love as well, Mama. So it's a really abrupt sort of wrap-up for his parents. There's not really any reason that I know of why they would have been, like, together. I didn't know she was going to Japan. Like, I don't know. The way this letter appears in the story is so abrupt. But I really was not worried about his parents. So it doesn't matter too much to me. It just feels strange. Like, I would rather have the book have ended with her saying the books always call them the halls and then end it there, honestly, than have this. But it's fine. And that's the end of the story. So, yeah, I'm sad to be saying goodbye to this book, but it's super duper fun. Oh, and Patricia says, I was waiting for you to read this after last week. I knew you'd enjoy it. Oh, the cat. Yeah. Oh, my God. It's so funny. Fucking Throgmorten. That's such a good name, too. I want to try and, like, use that for something someday. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap. I'm like almost on time for once. So thank you again so much for listening. Thank you again so much to Patricia for commissioning this entire book. And I was going to say I'll see you soon with a new episode, but I won't. This is over. So I guess I'll see you eventually with something else, hopefully. Keep your eyes open. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.